Last week we had record numbers of views, millions of views, for the question, where is Kate? And the story hasn't gone away, you know. In fact, the mystery has deepened. Entirely contradictory photographs have been published, some of them falsified, by Kensington Palace, by unknown photographers, and by a television producer who has produced a video, not just a photograph, of what purports to be the Princess of Wales and the Prince of Wales, the heir to the British throne. Not a fanciful matter because, well, he will be the head of state one day, maybe even one day sooner than we think or hope. The truth is that none of these pictures and none of these videos have been verified by Kensington Palace, by the royal family themselves, yet they have been spun across millions of front pages, across hundreds of minutes of footage broadcast on television. Let's start with the one in the car. Not the one where she's turning her head away and you can see the back of her head and you're invited to believe that it is the Princess of Wales leaving for a separate engagement with the Prince of Wales, an engagement he attended on his own. Let's leave that one, park that one to one side. I mean the one through the windscreen, which shows a rather full-in-the-face Princess Kate. Not many believed that it really was her, or, charitably, they thought if it was her, she's been badly affected by whatever medication, steroids, or whatever that she is on, because the Kate we remember from Christmas Day, which is the last verified sighting of the wife of the heir to the British throne, was, well, rather more slender in demeanour. And then there was the one that was published in video form, supposedly of the happy royal couple skipping gaily through a farmer's market, though only one person out of all the people there thought to take out their phone and take a picture or a video of that undoubtedly joyous occasion. The problem with it is there is nobody in the land who believes that that looks like the Princess of Wales. Prince of Wales we can't see. He's got a baseball cap pulled over his face. Could be anybody, could have been me. But the Princess of Wales is in full view in the video, and if it is her, she has changed radically. Not least, she looks at least 15 years younger than the last time we saw the mother of four on Christmas Day. If it is her, the rejuvenating effect of whatever medical treatment she's been having will be much sought after in the future by others. But it's not just that she looks remarkably younger. It is that she looks very different indeed. In fact, the unkind would say she looked more like the Marchioness of Cholmondeley than she did look like Princess Kate, the Princess of Wales. But that would surely be a step too far. Why would she allow her chum from Cholmondeley impersonate her in a farmer's market, stepping out with her husband? One thing is undeniable. The woman glimpsed through the front windscreen of the car and the woman in the farmer's market are not the same woman. One of those pictures might be true, but both of them cannot be true. Now, everyone and his dog has been warned that a royal announcement is imminent. It was said to be the middle of this morning. Then I thought perhaps the Prime Minister is going to announce something very important when he came into the chamber at 12 noon for Prime Minister's questions. But I knew from his demeanour, a kind of faux levity, and his blue rather than black tie, that he was not about to announce anything of great moment. And so, indeed, he didn't. So we're still waiting for a royal announcement. We know that the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood was advised that there would be a royal statement today of unspecified nature and scope. We know that because that leaked to the Scottish press corps in Edinburgh, but no announcement came. And so we're left still asking the question, what on earth is going on in the British royal family? Why have we not seen an authentic, unfalsified picture of the wife of the heir to the British throne? When will we learn exactly what has happened, either inside Kensington Palace, inside the operating theatre, at the hospital that she unexpectedly attended? They say that it was scheduled, but it was not scheduled, according to her closest aides, people who work with her every day, who had no idea that she was to go into hospital that day. No idea what ailment she has, no idea the state of her health, indeed even her whereabouts. We'll be talking again to David Clues of Unity Network News, who was the proximate reason for the millions of people who viewed our clips on our last show. I've just spoken in the House. I have the dust of the House of Commons chamber on my boots. I spoke on Gaza. I spoke on the Iraq war. I spoke on little Macron's plan to march into Odessa. I spoke on the war in the Red Sea, the danger of a war with Iran, the war in Ukraine. I spoke about the missing Foreign Secretary. Here is why. We have a situation that we are simultaneously pontificating about the quality of other people's democracy, about the quality of other people's elections, when we in Britain have an unelected head of state, an unelected prime minister, and an unelected foreign secretary. Now, you can tolerate a business secretary like Peter Mandelson being in the Lords whilst being a member of the British cabinet. Frankly, no one much wanted to set eyes on Peter Mandelson. He was better wrapped up in a rodent's fur in the House of Lords. But when you are the Foreign Secretary of Britain in the midst, in the swirl of the most dangerous international events in my lifetime, certainly since the Cuban Missile Crisis, you cannot have a missing Foreign Secretary who cannot be questioned by the elected members of the British Parliament, who sits in what is quaintly called another place, which we're not allowed to go into. We never see him. We can't bump into him in the corridor. We can't see him in the voting lobby or in the tea room. And we, above all, cannot ask him questions. Sure, he faces questions by other rodent-wrapped members of the House of Lords, but that's not quite the same thing, because we elected members have to answer our constituents about Britain's foreign policy without the ability to question the man responsible for it. This is untenable. It is an affront to democracy. Indeed, it is a farce. In tonight's debate, in which I spoke, we literally got into discussing where in the building could a lectern be erected from which the Foreign Secretary could address us, could be asked questions from us. We talked about which direction the microphones would have to be turned or returned into. How would we be able to speak through the chair at one end of the building whilst questioning a man at the opposite end of the building? And the rather leisurely minister who replied to the debate literally quoted the precedents of the 17th century. 17th, not 18th, 17th, not 19th, 17th century. He talked about how there was precedent for bringing to the bar of the House. He mentioned two of them. The Duke of Buckingham's the only one that stayed in my mind, largely because he was called to the bar to answer for his lascivious lifestyle and behaviour, which had affronted the 17th century British Parliament. Must have been pretty lascivious, judging by the standards of the 17th century. He did mention that others had been summoned in the 18th century, including the Duke of Wellington, to to answer questions from the members on the Peninsular War. I'm not making any of this up. This was the debate that took place not 1 hour ago in the House of Commons, and he did mention that the last person to be called to the bar of the House to answer questions was a Mr. Junior. I was, I think, alone of all the members present who recall Mr. Junior, John Junior, of the Daily Express, famous for one of my favourite lines. When confronted with codswallop, he would turn to his missing wife and say, "Pass the sick bag, Alice." And that is exactly how I felt at the end of the debate. 1957, 2024. And we have a missing aristocrat called David Cameron, involved in Gaza, involved in the Red Sea, involved with the preparation for war being made by little Macron, about whom more later in a minute, involved in confronting China in the South China Sea, and none of us can question him as to the wisdom of any or all of these foreign wars in which Britain is, up to a point, embroiled. This is unacceptable in a country that calls itself a democracy and traduces other people's democracy whilst tolerating a farce such as this in our own midst. Let me turn to little Macron. I've stopped calling him little Napoleon because actually Napoleon, whilst short, was a man of substance, a man of stature who left a footprint across all of Europe and indeed farther afield. Little Macron will never be able to do that. He's more a Bourbon Dauphin sitting on his gilded throne in the palace of Élysée in Paris, ordering around imaginary armies. France has no army to speak of. The last time the French army was tested in a European theatre, they folded like a cheap deck chair, allowing Hitler all the way to the Eiffel Tower in record quick time, faster than you could get there in an Uber today. They collapsed like a cheap tent. They cannot successfully prevail against Niger, against Burkina Faso, but they're ready to fight the Russians. I need not mention that the last time the Emperor of France went to Moscow, he had to retreat, a completely bedraggled and defeated figure. I could mention the last time the French were in Odessa, when they were part of the war of intervention to try and reverse the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917. They held Odessa until the then nascent Red Army of soldiers and sailors, workers and peasants, including women cavalry troops, routed the French and drove them from Odessa. The French army today is not what it was in 1920 and 1921. And the Russian army isn't what it was in 1920-21. The difference is the French army is much reduced from then, and the Russian army is super armed, super trained, battle hardened, and will make mincemeat out of any Frenchman or woman foolish enough to be sent by this little Dauphin on this fool's errand to occupy Odessa. Odessa is a Russian city. It is a Russian national treasure, and it will be a Russian city again, whether over the body of Macron's French Foreign Legion or not. We must hope not, for enough people from France, more than any other country, have already perished in this ridiculous but bloody war in Ukraine, a war that need never have been fought, should never have been fought. If it hadn't been for the scuppering of the peace deal arrived at in Turkey, scuppered by Boris Johnson, who he, where he, then none of this would be happening. If France and others, Germany in particular, had lived up to the guarantor role that they volunteered to take for the implementation of the Minsk II agreements, this war would not be happening. Ukraine would not now be partitioned, along lines still to be determined. All of the east of Ukraine is now and will forever be a part of Russia. The southern coast, including Odessa and linking up with Transnistria, will almost certainly be, before this is over, back in the Russian fold, part of their ancient motherland, leaving a rump state utterly dependent on the European Union and the remains of NATO after President Donald Trump has pulled the United States out of NATO. President Trump is coming. You might not like it. I don't like it. I'm not exultant in any way that President Trump is coming back, but I am exultant that President Biden is on the way out. That much is clear. Short of terminating the presidential bid of Donald Trump, with extreme prejudice perhaps, a black swan event, a 1963 Dealey Plaza event, a 9/11 type of event. And Ron Paul and General Flynn have both warned in the last 24 hours about such a black swan event, by which they mean an unforeseeable, unexpected event that will change everything utterly in its wake. Short of a successful black swan event, Donald Trump will be back in November. And one of the things he's promising is to pull the United States out of NATO. But if any semblance of NATO continues to exist, if the fools in charge of European governments intend to continue to subsidize the remaining population of Western Ukraine, this rump state that will be left, then it will be a burden and a debt to all of you. Think Kosovo, but think 100, maybe 1,000 times the burden, the weight that Kosovo has turned out to be. We know now that the British general election will be in the second half of the year. These were the words spoken by little Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister unelected of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Well, personally, I'm ready for it any time he likes. But I doubt that the so-called opposition, the so-called Labour Party, are looking forward to the fight. Sure, in the national opinion polls, if the false dichotomy is pitched, either Sunak or Starmer, Starmer wins. And he will almost certainly win the largest number of seats in the Parliament. But I'm here to tell you that he will face an unprecedented number of unprecedentedly popular and powerful opponents for the Labour votes that he might otherwise have been able to count on. Not just the millions of Muslim voters who will not countenance voting for the genocide Labour Party, which is dripping in the blood of the Palestinian people, blood of tens, scores of thousands of Palestinians, most of them women and children, who've been torn apart with the active support of both the British government and the so-called British opposition. Millions of Muslims simply will not vote for that. Millions of young people who might otherwise have been excited about the possibility of getting the Tories out at last will not vote for it. They will not vote for genocide. And so all the calculations of the British political class are beginning to have to be recalibrated. Keep your seats, fasten your seatbelts. It's low key up next on the mother of all talk shows.